Welcome to Medical Education Grand Round, sponsored by the Institute for Medical Education here at ICON. I see a lot of new faces here, people who haven't been to our Medical Education Grand Round series. I wanted to tell you a brief thing about the Institute. So the Institute for Medical Education was founded in 2001 with a mission to promote and advance medical educators and to recognize innovation in teaching and medical education research. So welcome. We hope you will join us for our series of Grand Rounds beyond this one as well. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Guralnick. So Dr. Guralnick received her MD from SUNY Buffalo School of Medicine and completed her pediatrics residency at the Children's Hospital of Buffalo. Dr. Guralnick joined the faculty at Stony Brook University Medical Center in '92, where she is Associate Professor of Pediatrics and Associate Dean for GME and Student Affairs. She's also the designated institutional official at Winthrop University Hospital. Dr. Guralnick is a member of the Transitional Year Residency Review Committee and a member of the ACGME Pediatric Milestone Project Group. She's Deputy Editor of the American Academy of Pediatrics publication PrEP Self-Assessment and participates on several American Academy of Pediatrics committees. She's a past president of the Association of Pediatric Program Directors and is a member of the NRMP Program Board of Directors. Dr. Guralnick maintains a primary care practice where she specializes in the care of children with special healthcare needs. So Dr. Guralnick's talk today is entitled ACGME Milestones, the opportunity of our educational lifetime. So thank you for joining us.
That's a very strange title.
It's a title that's supposed to make you feel that way.
Excited.
I'm trying to share I'm excited, so I'm trying to share my enthusiasm with everybody. I'm trying to get it to be contagious to everybody. So I'll try to talk loud. I'm not a loud talker, so I'll try to talk loud enough. But if I'm not, just tell me, because I always think I'm yelling. Okay, I have no financial disclosures, unfortunately.
You wish?
Yeah.
I do, I wish. But I will disclose that I am a rabid anti-Red Sox fan.
Oh.
and that hopefully next year will be the Yankees, and go Cardinals tonight. So, but that is not part of my learning objective. So trying to be a good educator, I put my learning objectives there. So hopefully at the end of this session, hopefully many of you can do a lot of this already, but if not, hopefully you'll be able to describe the reasons behind and process leading to the milestones, discuss how milestones evaluation differs from previous evaluation methods, how milestones will be incorporated into the new ACGME accreditation process, and a little bit about EPAs. A little bit, because I think that we're still all busy trying to get milestones, and to go into the EPAs is a little bit, it hurts your brain in the beginning, so. So this is a couple of these slides I stole from Tom Naska from the ACGME, and so a lot of the whole concept of milestones and everything that we're doing is trying to bring together undergraduate, graduate, continuing education continuum, along with the 6 competencies, and at the same time a concept of the Dreyfus scale of education, of learning, with novice, advanced, beginner, competent, proficient, expert, and master, and that these all really aren't separate circles, but really all blend together to make the way we learn and what we do. So as you all know, when the competencies came into place in 2002, many of you were around, some of you may not have been, this was the reaction that most of the country had, and I'm sure Scott was among them.
It was actually worse than that. That's why I became the DIO.
That was the beginning of, I was early in my program director world at that point, so I didn't quite react that way. But truthfully, the core competencies, I think, had significant impacts. The first was this, a lot of paperwork. But I think it really did make us find gaps in our education. I think our biggest areas that came out from that were probably in practice-based learning and improvement in systems-based practice, which nobody really thought about before the competencies. And then we really did start to fill our gaps and make change. So despite that it was a lot of work and an imperfect system, I think it really did have some positive effects, a lot of positive effects. So this is again from Tom Naska, and what he talks about here is when you think about competencies and now milestones, you think about the continuum of professional development in a 3-year specialty program or any other, but this is just specific to 3, and how people move along. And if you look at this chart, I mean, we all know they move from as they move along from the beginning of their training to the end of their training, they move along, hopefully along the Dreyfus scales from novice to advanced beginner to competent and maybe proficient and higher. The interesting thing to me about this slide is that you'll notice it's a range. So, we all know we don't train at exactly the same level, but the part I found the most interesting is at the end there, where, as you go through your PGY 1, 2, and 3 year, everybody sort of tracks within a range. And then when they graduate, many of them don't go any further. Many people do, and they can move on to expert and master and that, and many people sort of just live there. And I think a big part of the concept with milestones especially is to think of that there's always a point to keep moving towards, and that maybe we shouldn't be stopping at that place. And then they also talk about that there are the 3 roles of the physician that we learn. And in training, we learn them at different rates. So one of the major role that we all think about is the role of clinician, and that one comes really, really quickly. That's what everybody works on when they're a resident. They all just, your main goal when you're a resident is trying not to kill people, and so you want to make sure that you're clinically capable. So you can see that moves pretty quickly over time. The role as teacher comes along next, and that's a little bit slower. And that's not just a teacher of medical students or your peers or whatever. It's your peers, it's junior residents, senior residents. It's teaching patients and families and all the different people you work with. So everything you do becomes being a teacher. And then manager of resources, which I always think is the equivalent of systems-based practice, is the last thing that comes into play. That people really need to have a grasp of the clinical world and all of that before they can even think about the systems pieces. But hopefully those do come in, and you start to gain skills in that as well. Tom Naska talks about why they made these changes. And he talks about what currently drives the structure and content of our residency programs. He says that what we currently have is what he calls circumstantial practice. So we have the curriculum, the ACGME standards, and we basically use time to train people. So they train for 3 years. It's done in the context of local service needs. We usually choose educational experiences within what we have institutionally or with the faculty that's already present, and at the end, and we use our individual idiosyncratic tools in our programs to check that everybody's moving along. And at the end of 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, depending on your program, they're educated. It's pretty hard not to finish, I think we all know. And so what he says is that it guarantees that education is institutionally idiosyncratic, and it lags rather than anticipates changes in the delivery system. And so what he wants us to move to, and what he says will drive the structure and content of our residency programs in the future, would be that rather than starting out with a required curriculum up front, we start out with required outcomes, what our expectations are going to be at the end. So you start out with those required outcomes in each clinical competency, which would be milestones based, and then you design educational experiences that would ensure that people meet those outcomes. Which could include specific faculty that you maybe need to bring in, or ones you hadn't utilized, or maybe the ones you have utilized, and design those experiences with that in mind. That there should be some, people would still be encouraged to use their own tools, but that there should be some universal tools that people are using, so that we know if people at Program A and Program B are actually achieving the same outcomes. Otherwise, if we have no universal tools, we don't know that our tools are measuring anything that's similar, and we don't know that our outcomes are going to be the same. And then hopefully, eventually, we'll graduate people with competency, expertise, and hopefully physicians that aspire to mastery, to see that as an end point and not to see competency as just their end point. This actually gives us, in addition to hopefully good training, and in no way does anyone say that we're not training people well. What they're saying is we don't have proof that we're training people well, that we have no way of knowing for sure if we're training people well and if we're training people similarly from place to place. And what they want to have is external accountability to the public, to them, to the people we're graduating, that everybody should know that we're graduating people with these skills. And it also, he feels, guarantees that education has the opportunity to anticipate change in the delivery system. So if something changes in the delivery system, then your outcomes that you're going to start with may change, so that the whole program starts with the outcomes up front, and it has an anticipatory quality. So from this came the Milestones project, which hopefully everybody knows probably a lot about, so I'm probably going to be very redundant and hopefully not boring about it. So Milestone Development, it was sponsored. A lot of people think of it as just the ACGME milestones, but it's actually the ACGME and the boards together worked to develop this. And each specialty had a working group which consisted of program directors, residents, some board involvement, someone involvement from the ROC, but the people who actually mostly made it up were program directors and at least one resident on every group. And there also were advisory groups with some educational expertise to make sure that those groups knew what they were doing. And each group was expected to have 3 to 4 face-to-face meetings, interim work with regular meetings, and were to develop milestones in 12 months or maybe less. And I have to say that in PEDS, it took us 3 years to develop the milestones, but I think we did a really good job, but I'm biased, compared to some of the others if you've seen them across the board. So 12 months was sort of a low expectation for it, but some of the groups did accomplish it in 12 months. So what are milestones? So milestones, as hopefully we know, are specific behaviors, attributes, or outcomes that would be demonstrated by residents by a particular point during their residency. And they're really just what their name suggests. So they're important markers that would be applied in a periodic fashion to ensure the residents, the program, the educational community, and the public that basic measures of educational progress are in line with comparable programs and general expectations. And that's the important piece about why we need to have something across the board, is because otherwise we don't really know if we're in line with anybody, and we don't have measures of baseline expectations. So how many people are pediatricians? Okay, I don't know if anybody else remembers their Denver, but the milestones are really just like a Denver developmental, so if you remember that from school or your training or whatever. So in the Denver, there's 4 domains. Like we have 6 domains for our competencies. In the Denver, there's 4 domains. They have speech, social, fine motor, and gross motor. And the children are expected to move along those domains over time. Not everybody achieves the same thing at the same time. But there are times which are normal. So the example I like to use is walking. So children are expected to walk between 10 and 14 months, and that's normal. So if they're walking 10 to 14 months, you're happy. If they're walking at 9 months or 8 months, you're still happy. But if they're not walking at 20 months, 21 months, that's a problem. You have to figure out what the problem is, and then you need to figure out a remediation plan of some sort for this kid who's not walking to get them to be able to walk. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the residents, is get them into that frame. And everybody knows they're not all going to do the same thing at the same time. The place that we're in right now is when they made the Denver, it took, I'm sure, years to collect data to decide what the benchmarks were. How did you know a kid needed to walk between 10 and 14 months? And that's where we're going to be with milestones right now, is we don't know how old you're going to be when you walk or when you're going to do whatever it is in residency. And all of the data that we're going to be providing, that I'll talk about again, is going to create those benchmarks that we don't have right now. Okay, I'm going to skip that one. So, and again, I mentioned that people achieve all of these things in different ways. So you can see that this kind of shows in an anesthesia program the expectation of how people move across in different areas of their competencies. So you could see in anesthesia, patient care again, non-procedural anesthesia is the first thing that goes up, just like we would expect. Their technical skills, their anesthesia-related technical skills come up next. And again, as in every specialty I think that exists, systems-based practice comes last. And also team skills, which I thought was really interesting, that team skills also track very late. And I think it's, again, because people can't really focus on all of those other skills until they feel like they're not going to kill somebody, which is sort of hopefully the center of everybody's being. So the guiding principles of each milestones group when they wrote their milestones would be that they would be feasible, that there had to be a manageable number of milestones. And that's why when medicine first came out with, I think, 152 milestones or something, that everybody realized that wasn't going to work and that they had to go back and do something. And so now they have 2 sets of things, but the required measurable ones are much, much smaller. Actually, they only have like 20 22, I think, right now in the reportable milestones. So they needed to have a manageable number of milestones that they wanted to make sure there was quality. For this, it was hard to know exactly what that would be, but it had to be an improvement over current approaches, that there had to be more meaningful and substantive, and they needed to be measurable. And we're going to talk more about comparing what we had to what we hopefully will have now. And that there would be reporting. There would have to be specialty-wide use of a template for milestones reporting and a central data repository so that we could get that information across the board. Hopefully everybody's seen Milestones. I know they just came out with the last couple of specialties. So I think all the specialties, not the subspecialties, but I think all the core specialties are out now as far as I know. They all look similar. So they all have 5 levels. So you can see the way they're built is, at the top is the sub-competency area. Actually, the first thing in there, professionalism, would be the competency, and then there's a sub-competency at the top. And then they all have 5 levels. Some have labeled their levels, some have not. You can see this is pediatrics, so in pediatrics they go up through level 1 through level 5 without, quote-unquote, a label name. Internal medicine, their level 1 is called critical deficiencies, and their highest level is called aspirational, and their level 4 is ready for unsupervised practice. The only thing that's a little bit uncomfortable or iffy to me about the unsupervised practice being level 4 is the ACGME, at least currently, does not require you to have level 4 in all areas to graduate. So I think it puts us in a kind of a weird position having that at the top, and that maybe once...
Do you even have specified levels that you have to achieve to graduate?
They don't.
Right?
They don't. No. But they don't. But this milestone states it, and you have to sign them off as ready for unsupervised practice. And so to me, that's kind of a little uncomfortable, which is why I'm glad I'm not an internist, among other reasons. So not an internist kind of person. And emergency medicine, again, they just have level 1 through 5 on theirs. And there's huge numbers differences. I think orthopedics has 13. OB just came out with 32. They may have the highest number right now. Peds has written 52, but only 21 have to be reported on. So it varies. So just a little bit about the Peds milestones, which I think really, what I'm going to say about this really goes to all of them. I don't think it's specific to the Peds milestones, but it's stuff that we actually in our group talked about. That the elements of one sub-competency often overlap with elements of another. And I think that's what we found with the competencies themselves, that sometimes you weren't sure if something was patient care or medical knowledge, or if it was interpersonal communication skills or professionalism. Because really, nothing is, well, not nothing, but most things are not just one. Most things are more than one, and they all cross over. So the same thing happened with the milestones. One person would be writing a milestone on communication, another would be writing another milestone, and they would say some of the same things, because you just can't break them apart that completely, I think, outside of just pure medical knowledge. And also that consistency in habits of professionalism are demonstrated through performance data across a number of contexts and observations over time. So and this is really from the summative standpoint, so you wouldn't want to summatively assess somebody based on one half-day session with them, although you certainly can formatively assess them, and that's something I know we struggle with faculty all the time. I can't assess them, I only spent 2 hours with them. Well, you can give them a formative assessment, you just can't give them a final grade, basically. And context is really important, because you may have a resident who does just great in the outpatient setting, but you put them in the ICU and they can't function at all. So a lot of the milestones, you need them to apply in different settings to make sure that the person can actually do that skill in both environments, or at least 2 environments. And then we also noted that there were certain developmental themes that came across all of the different milestone or competency areas. That learners moved from being more dependent learners to independent learners over time. They moved from being extrinsically motivated to intrinsically motivated. That there was an appreciation of need for teamwork and dependency on resources outside of themselves. And that goes back to that same thing that anesthesia showed with that slide, where the teamwork piece comes in late. People don't necessarily appreciate what the other members of the team do, know what the other people on the team do, know how to use other people on the team, know how to let go of things. It's a tremendous skill to be able to delegate and to be able to let go and trust people to do things. And a really important one that came out was comfort with uncertainty and strategies to manage ambiguity. And I don't know if any of you do undergraduate medical education, but the UME people just put that into their now core competencies that they're going to be having. So the important thing about comfort with uncertainty and strategies to manage ambiguity is it's not really, it's talking about your ability to live with being uncertain. And, you know, if you think about, you know, junior people, they are so uncomfortable saying, I don't know, they don't know, they don't want to look stupid, they don't want to not be able to take care of someone, they want to feel safe. And as you get more experienced and as you get more knowledge and skills, you'll see senior people will more readily say, I don't know, let's figure it out. You know, and so it's important for them to learn that as long as they're doing what they can for the immediate critical need of the person to keep them alive, everything else can wait and they can take time to figure that out. But learning to be comfortable with that is a late skill that is a really, really important one. The other really nice thing about milestones, and I think this may be the best thing about milestones, is that they act as a learning roadmap for trainees, or they can act as a learning roadmap. One of the things that people complain about all the time is, I think we all know, nobody gives anybody feedback. It's like a nightmare to get feedback from somebody. But milestones are built-in feedback, because if you look at a milestone set, right, you've got all these levels, and what you can say to somebody, or what they can say if nobody says anything and they just get the milestone rating, is they can look at the set of milestones that has 5 levels, and it says, I'm performing here. And this is where they want me to go. This is the description of the next level. This is the description of the next level. So I need to start doing the things, or continue to do the things that are in the next box. So it's sort of built-in feedback. And the residents love that. They love that they're seeing what our expectations are, because we're not very good at telling them what our expectations are. And again, they're going to contribute over time to establishment of the normative ranges of behaviors to help us define those performance standards. Really important about how people should be assessed on milestones versus the way many people use Likert scales is that residents should always progress along a single continuum throughout training. Kind of like if you go back and you think about the Denver scale, children should never regress. They're not supposed to go backwards. So when we're normally, scoring residents, you'll find that they'll go, as they get more senior, people have different expectations, and so they may not move forward. They may move backwards as you have higher expectations. They shouldn't move backwards on this, and we'll talk about that more, because they should either be at this level or they should move forwards. It would be really concerning if they lost skills, just like it's concerning if a child loses skills. They should be assessed as an individual along that scale and not in comparison to others. So, and again, the walking thing I think comes in really handy to talk about that. So if a kid is walking, they're walking. If they're not walking, it doesn't matter if the kid next to them is walking or not walking. It doesn't matter if everyone else in the room is walking or not. They're walking or they're not walking. So they either have the skill or they don't have the skill. Same thing for their level. It doesn't matter if they're a first year or a third year or a second year. They're either walking or they're not walking. And that's the way people should be assessed. So what do programs have to do? What's the next step with this? So you need to have, obviously, there is program-specific assessment. Ongoing formative assessment is going to happen in all of our programs still, with tailored to local needs that should interdigitate with the milestones. They're not planning at this point to specify tools and measurements to be used other than the 6-month requirements. Right now, there's no other tools. People are approaching it a couple of different ways. We'll start with let's talk about the reporting. So everybody's going to have this reporting template. So they'll give you, every 6 months, the programs will get a reporting template where the program director has to go in for each person and put in their level. It'll look actually more like this. This is when you roll over, so sorry, it's a little busy looking, but when you go on the screen and then you roll over a level, it'll actually give you the words that match that level so that you can see what they are and make sure that you're not clicking something that wasn't really what you meant to click, which sometimes happens to people otherwise. What was I just going to say about the reporting? So one of the things that there's a couple of different approaches people are using. So you need to be able to convert what you're getting in your evaluations into milestones. So actually, let me talk about the role of competency committees, then I'll talk a little bit more about that. So competency committees are expected, competency committees have to be made up of at least 3 faculty members, and then you can have other people on the competency committees. And they're going to be taking all of the evaluation information that they get from any way that anybody was evaluated, and then taking that and assigning milestone levels. Talking about how competency committees are going to work is a whole other talk, so I'm not going to go into that in detail. But there's a couple of different approaches to how people are doing this, because how do you take the information you get from your current evaluations and then turn them into milestones assessments? Some programs are using, and my program is actually doing this, using milestones as questions and training people to answer those, and that's one way of doing it. The other way is to take all of your evaluation forms and map the results of those to milestone levels, so that for each form you'd say, you know, on this question, if you got a level 2, then that would mean that your professionalism is, you know, milestone level whatever. Those are the more objective ways to do it, because I mean, otherwise, if you kind of just go in and you read the stuff and then you just do a gestalt is not very objective, and one person's gestalt may be different from someone else's gestalt, and so if you have a lot of people on your committee, you may get a lot of different opinions on what a level assignment is going to be. So without a specific mapping, I think it's going to be very difficult to get objective assessment. But that will be the role of the milestones groups, of the competency groups, will be to make recommendations for milestone levels. The program director always has ultimate responsibility, so if the program director does not agree, they don't have to take the exact number that the committee came. It's not a vote, but it's a consensus discussion about the levels. And then what the ACGME is really looking at is a program level summary. So the ACGME doesn't actually look at people. Even though they're going to be getting people data, that's not really what their concern is. The only reason they're going to be getting people data is so that they can, so people can be tracked even for themselves, so that people can be tracked across a milestone. But what the ACGME is really looking for is program level data. So they want to see that your PGY1s are performing at a certain level, your PGY2s are performing at a certain level. So this would be like a report, for example, for each person, you know, they'd be giving all these levels, and then it comes together to be this. So this is, in Singapore, they started the first ACGME internationally accredited program, and because they're new and they've only been around for 3 years, they were able to pilot milestones within them from the start of their programs. So this is a program report. And each of these individual people with the colors here, those are individual residents, 122 paired observations. And actually, it's interesting because you can see they color-coded it. So the people who went up are all the white ones, pretty much, except the black ones too. But there's these yellow ones that all seem to go down. What they're really caring about is this red line. So the ACGME doesn't care about all this noise in here. They want to see that your red line did this. If your red line does this, they know something's wrong. If your red line does this, but everybody else in the country's red line does this, then that means you're off from everybody else and our benchmarks are not quite ready yet. And so that's why they need a lot of data to look at the benchmarks. But basically they want to see improvement. It doesn't matter whether you're from a program that has the weakest residents or the strongest residents, they expect your residents to improve over time. And the other thing you can, whoops, sorry. Let's see, no, I don't have that. So the interesting one to me here is this guy who started down here, and I wonder how he got in the program with professionalism down here. But I was happy to see his professionalism went up here. Yeah, exactly. But you know, they're hoping, of course, that you're going to see that. So as a program director, the benefit of this is that you're going to see this. So you're going to say, God, this person's down here. I better fix that. And then you'll know if they're not. So you'll be looking at all of this, but only the ACGME is only going to look at that. So how will the milestones be used by them? So they know the benchmarks are not defined yet. So they're not using this as a high risk thing unless you're so far off that it's, you know, scary. For most people, this is not going to be high risk because they're creating. So they're going to be looking at the residents and, you know, looking to see that the residents are meeting or exceeding the milestones compared to other programs in the country. If your program is significantly below in a competency area, so they're going to look at the global competency domains. They're not going to look at every sub-competency. They're going to say, okay, in patient care, in practice-based learning and improvement or whatever. So say your program was 2 standard deviations below the average program in the country in practice-based learning and improvement. So then they're going to come to your program and they're going to say, we're concerned. They're going to send you a letter, actually, probably. We're concerned that your program is so far below practice-based learning and improvement than everybody else. You need to fix this. And then they'll give you time to fix it. If, say, in the next 6 months, they're seeing no change, no improvement, they may do a focused site visit. And the focused site visit's purpose, as far as they're saying right now, is they don't want to shut programs down, because I'm sure you guys have all seen the data, and there's not going to be enough positions in the country for everybody. So the last thing they want to do is close programs. So they want to go in and they want to help you fix the problem. So they want to make sure people are getting the education they're supposed to get, not close programs because they're not meeting standards. So that's the way they say it's going to work. The goal is remediation, not punishment. Specialty milestones, subspecialty milestones. So I think, as you know, the status of the specialty milestones, the phase 1 milestones all started this July, so we all should be working in a milestones-based system of some sort right now. The phase 2s will start in July. The final phase 2 programs, I believe, are all out now, the milestones, so people can start planning for that. And the subspecialties will be out in time to start also in July. The plan is they will also start in July. I think they'll all be finalized by December. What I had been told, and it may have changed, was that at least for internal medicine subspecialties, and I would guess for a majority of subspecialties, that the subspecialty specific milestones will really be focused on just patient care and medical knowledge, and that the other ones, you know, practice-based learning improvement, systems-based practice, professionalism, interpersonal communication skills, will really be the same as the other ones because they really apply across the board. So what we're waiting for is really patient care and medical knowledge in the subspecialties. I was just going to talk very briefly about EPAs. Okay, so what are the advantages of the general competencies, which are the core competencies that we're used to? They do help identify important physician attributes, and they focus assessment on achievement of consensus competencies. However, they have several disadvantages. One of the biggest disadvantages is they are not discrete and measurable. They're very abstract. People do have trouble sort of getting their brains around it, and we don't have good ways to measure them. Professionalism, systems-based practice, practice-based learning improvement, and interpersonal communication skills are not discrete and are not easily measured. And health outcomes depend on competent individuals within a competent group, within a competent system. So competencies themselves can be difficult to document when there are systems problems or group problems that aren't functioning, and then the individual is disadvantaged in their ability to become competent. Competencies also always have to be assessed in a clinical context because, you know, as I mentioned before, if you do things in one setting, it's very different from when you do it in a different setting, and the appearance will be different. And integration of competencies have to be assessed in a clinical context. So just because you have medical knowledge and you have patient care doesn't mean that you can do them together in a clinical setting. So you need to look at all of those, the interpersonal communication skills, all of them. You have to see how they work together in a setting, not just as individual pieces. And that leads to the concept of EPAs, which are Entrustable Professional Activities. So why focus on entrustment? We constantly and often subconsciously make entrustment decisions as we work with students, residents, and colleagues. I think we all know, you know, who, when we leave the building at night, who we're comfortable with and who we're not. And why we're comfortable with them is what makes up entrustment, but we can't always say what that is. It's much more meaningful to ask faculty, do you trust this person to provide normal newborn care without direct supervision, than it is to say, is this person competent in practice-based learning and improvement? It's just so much more tangible, more concrete to people. So what does entrustable mean? And the data on this comes a lot from Kennedy's work. So the central concept is trust. And it's usually based on several things. It's based on clinical competence, hard work, truthfulness, and knowing one's limits. So all of those are part of the trust being entrustable with something. And actually, let me go back to that. And you can see that each of those entails several different competencies. So, you know, clinical competence has a bunch of competencies within it. Knowing one's limits involves several different competencies. So that's how EPAs end up incorporating multiple competencies within them. So trust should be based on observed, consistently satisfactory performance over time. And the criterion for entrustment in general should be the ability to perform a function to a desired level, because you can entrust people to different things. It could be entrusting them just to write a note, or it can be entrusting them to run an ICU, to a desired level of performance without direct supervision. Entrustable professional activities need to be part of essential professional work. They need to require specific knowledge, skill, and attitudes. They would be confined to qualified personnel and lead to a recognized output. They need to be independently executable in a predictable time frame, so you need to be able to do it when you're in a unit, when you're on call, when you're in a clinic session. They need to be observable and measurable, and should reflect at least one, if not more, competencies. So examples of entrustable professional activities can be caring for a well newborn, performing a patient discharge, performing an admission history and physical, or performing a consultation. So how is an EPA broken down into observable behaviors? For example, the caring for a well newborn EPA consists of several different parts. You have to be able to perform a physical exam to recognize abnormalities. You have to be able to identify and follow key evidence-based guidelines. You have to be able to transition care to the primary care practitioner who will be following this child. And you need to be able to demonstrate enough confidence to put new parents at ease when you interact with them. Each of the EPAs can be mapped to all competencies and many of the subcompetencies. And you need to be able to discriminate these critical linkages to determine, and you need to determine where they're best assessed within the whole of training. So you need to assign so many EPAs that will cover everything that you need to cover to make sure you assess all the competencies and subcompetencies within them. And I know it's a really weird thing to think about. I'm going to skip that one. So if you take an EPA of, say, providing a medical home for patients with chronic illness, that would incorporate, they say, patient care, interpersonal communication skills, professionalism, and systems-based practice. If you're talking about leading a healthcare team, it can incorporate almost all of the core competencies. So people will be taking these EPAs that are created and ensuring that we can map all of the competencies and then all of the subcompetencies within them to make sure that we're doing something to assess everything. Certain subcompetencies that are critical to entrustment may be universal, that we may need to have them in multiple EPAs, we may need to have them across all specialties. There are certain things that will have to be there and everything. Okay, so why EPAs? Why are we bothering with EPAs? The reason that people feel that it's important to do that is they align what we assess with what we really do, and that's what a lot of faculty struggle with, is trying to see the relevance in a lot of the assessment we do. So if we relate it to something we do every day or they do every day, then it makes more sense to assess it. It makes more sense not just to faculty, but often to trainees and to the public. And they do help us translate those abstract competencies into vital daily used attributes. And the other thing about entrustable professional activities is they really make explicit the crucial bond between the trainee and the mentor and the student, the trust that happens between you, so it makes that an explicit part of the relationship. So they are doing things that will make EPAs useful to programs and more tangible to us than they are right now, because right now they are a little abstract. They are going to be creating vignettes to bring those behaviors to light in authentic clinical experiences. And they're actually planning to make level-based vignettes so that you can assess different levels of an EPA. Then you'll be able to train faculty by having them watch these vignettes to see what the expected levels of performance would be, and so it'll be a really nice faculty development tool. But that's years away because they're still just doing it. Faculty development is key with all of this, with milestones. Faculty development is really important. Training faculty to understand that you can't, you shouldn't be comparing them to other people. You shouldn't be looking at their level. That you should, that you can assess things in different settings, and so it just getting people to understand how to use them is very, very important. And getting trainees to understand how they're being used and how they can use them is very, very important. So I think you need to do all of those. And from my standpoint, like I said, I think you should enjoy the ride. I think this is an incredible time. I think medical education is changing dramatically in our lifetime, and we're making those changes. And it's exciting to be a part of what I think is going to be a whole new world of assessment and feedback and all of that. And so we should enjoy it. So that's it.